How's it going there, ladies and gentlemen? Hailstone here again, and today we have a pretty interesting video that I'm excited to react to. Today we're going to be learning a little bit more about British Army ranking structure. Now, this is a video that I'm excited to do because I've seen a couple of examples or pictures or videos of British soldiers and they have their ranks, and I've seen things like crowns, and I've seen star looking things, I've seen swords, and honestly I have no idea what any of it signifies. So this should be a very fun video. I'm excited to learn a little bit more about it, and I think that as the video goes on I'll also kind of explain about US Army ranking structures so you can have a comparison as to what they equal in the US Army. So without further ado, let's hop into the video.
There are so many ranks in the British Army. Working out what order they progress in can be confusing to those who aren't educated on the topic. In this video, we look at a simple guide to British Army ranks in their correct order.
Also, this video is by Premier History, so I'll put a link to the video down in the description. Go like and subscribe to them.
Private. On completion of basic training, all new soldiers start as privates, although the title may be trooper, gunner, signaller, sapper, guardsman, rifleman, or even kingsman, depending on the corps of regiment in which they are serving.
Okay, well that's pretty interesting that there's different titles just for the rank of private, and I heard a couple of similarities there. But they mean very different things in the U.S. Army. For example, Guardsman, as you can imagine, doesn't denote any sort of rank. It's a branch within the U.S. Army. You're called a Guardsman. Then the other thing I heard was sapper, and that is pretty interesting that you could be a sapper right out of basic training. In the U.S. Army, we also have sappers, but to become a sapper, you have to go to a very difficult and highly demanding specialized school that teaches you demolition tactics and all sorts of things like that. So that is pretty interesting.
Lance Corporal. Promotion to Lance Corporal may follow after initial trade training or after about 4 years as a private. Lance Corporals are required to supervise a small team of up to 4 soldiers called a section. They also have opportunities to specialize and undertake specialist military training.
Okay, well that is also interesting. So the U.S. Army does not utilize the rank Lance Corporal, but the United States Marine Corps does use Lance Corporal as a rank, and I believe the equivalent in the U.S. Army would be a Private First Class, which is what I actually enlisted as before I became a cadet. And it sounds like there's a lot more responsibility that goes along with a Lance Corporal, both in the British Army and from what I hear in the Marine Corps as well. In the U.S. Army, a Private First Class does not hold a lot of responsibility at all.
Corporal. After 6 to 8 years and depending on ability to lead, promotion to corporal typically follows. In this rank, additional trade and instructor qualifications can be gained. Corporals are given command of more soldiers and equipment, such as tanks and guns.
Now, the U.S. Army here is pretty interesting. We have 2 different ranks that you can promote to after being a Private First Class. You can become a specialist or you can become a corporal. Corporal is a lot less often used, but from what I understand, the U.S. Army is changing that, where every soldier will have to go through the rank of corporal before becoming a sergeant, whereas before you could go straight from a specialist to a sergeant.
Sergeant.
Like that.
Sergeant is a senior role of responsibility, promotion to which typically takes place after 12 years of service depending on ability. Sergeants typically are second in command of a troop or platoon of up to 35 soldiers, with the important responsibility for advising and assisting junior officers. Staff Sergeant. After a few years as a sergeant, promotion to either staff or colour sergeant may follow. This is a senior role combining man and resource management of around 120 soldiers, or even command of a platoon or troop.
Okay, so now that we've kind of started diving into the NCOs, it's sounding fairly similar to the U.S. Army, but I should point out a little bit of trivia for you. So British Army ranks, it looks like, have an inverted chevron, at least as compared to U.S. Army ranks where our chevrons are pointed up into the I don't know, the stars. Maybe that's why we did it. But funnily enough, we actually also used to utilize an inverted chevron that pointed down. And I believe it was during World War One. It might have been the Spanish-American War that we stopped inverting the chevrons that we used to signify NCO. So a little bit of fun trivia there for you.
Warrant Officer Class 2. This is a senior management role focusing on the training, welfare and discipline of a company, squadron or battery of up to 120 soldiers. WO2s act as the senior advisors to the major in command of the subunit and may also be selected for a commission as an officer. Warrant Officer Class 1. The most senior soldier rank in the British Army, typically reached after 18 years of outstanding service. WO1 are the senior advisors of their unit's commanding officer, with leadership, discipline and welfare responsibilities of up to 650 officers, soldiers and equipment.
Okay, so the U.S. Army does also utilize warrant officers, but I'm not going to actually speak on them just because I don't have as much information on them, and so I can't really talk about what they do in the U.S. Army. During my 2-ish years over 2 years now, in the Army, I've seen a warrant officer maybe 3 times, and so they are a lot more rare in the U.S. Army, and I believe that they hold specialized skills or tasks or something or another, but that's all I'm going to say on the matter just because I'm not as informed on the roles of warrant officers in the U.S. Army.
Officer Cadet. This is the rank held during initial officer training at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst or in the University Officers Training Corps. It, like a private, has no insignia.
Okay, that is pretty interesting. In the U.S. Army, I am a cadet right now, and our rank is actually just a filled out black dot. And it is pretty interesting. So when I first enlisted in the Army, I was a private first class, and then I signed a contract with our Reserve Officer Training Corps, is what it's called, at least in the way that I'm commissioning. And that actually superseded, I guess is the right word, my original contract with the Army, and it overruled, and I became a cadet instead of a private first class. But that is pretty interesting.
Second Lieutenant. This is the rank held on commissioning from the Royal Military Academy. It's normally held for 1 to 2 years. During their time as Second Lieutenant, officers complete special to arms training relevant to their corps. After training is complete, they are responsible for leading up to 30 soldiers in a platoon or troop, both in training and on operations.
Okay, so I can understand in the ranking structure why you would have a crown as one of the symbols there, but if somebody could tell me what that, it looks like a star almost. We'll see if it pops up. There we go. If somebody could tell me what that is or what that signifies, that'd be appreciated, because honestly, I have not a clue what it's supposed to be. So that would be appreciated if somebody could let me know.
The rank of lieutenant is typically held for 2 to 3 years. They normally command a platoon or troop of around 30 soldiers, with the increased responsibilities from being a second lieutenant. They also have the opportunity to gain specialised skills outside their unit. Captain. The rank of captain is typically held for 5 to 10 years. Captains are normally made second in command of a sub-unit of up to 120 soldiers. They are key players in the planning and decision-making process, with tactical responsibility for operations on the ground, as well as equipment maintenance, logistics support, and personnel.
Okay, well that is also interesting. So in the U.S. Army, a second lieutenant, their insignia is just a golden bar. Looks like a rectangle. And then a first lieutenant, what we call them, or just a regular lieutenant in the British Army, is just a silver bar. And then a captain is 2 silver bars with 2 little, I guess, connectors in between them. And I'll put the ranks up next to me so you can see what I'm talking about. And it looks like in the British Army, it's that same insignia that just adds 1, 2, and then 3 to signify. So that is fairly interesting. And again, the responsibilities sound fairly the same. A captain in the U.S. Army is usually either a battery commander, troop commander, company commander, or something of that sort.
Major. Typically, a major will be given command of a sub-unit of up to 120 officers and soldiers, with responsibility for their training, welfare and administration, both in camp and operations, as well as the management of their equipment. Lieutenant Colonel. Lieutenant Colonels typically command units of up to 650 soldiers, containing 4 to 5 subunits, known as the commanding officer. They are responsible for the overall operational effectiveness of their unit in terms of the military capability, welfare, and general discipline. Commanding officer is typically a 2-year appointment.
Okay, so a U.S. Army major, their insignia is a golden oak leaf, and then a lieutenant colonel is a silver oak leaf.
Colonel. Colonels are not usually field commanders, except in the Royal Army Medical Corps. Typically, they serve as staff officers between field commands at battalion and brigade level. It's the lowest of the staff ranks, and they are the principal advisors to senior officers.
Okay, that is also interesting. So the U.S. Army colonel, their insignia is a bald eagle, I believe with arrows in one claw and olive branches in the other, and I'll put it up next to me so I can be sure I got that right.
Brigadier. Brigadier is not considered to be a general officer rank by the British Army, but rather a field officer rank. Brigadiers can command a brigade or be a director of operational capability groups, such as the Director of Staff.
Okay, so we do not have a brigadier, but we do have a brigadier general, that is, as you can imagine, considered a general officer, and the command structure is fairly different, and I've actually learned about this in my officer training between the British Army and the U.S. Army. But that rank is just 1 star, and you'll see what happens as we go along.
Major General. Major Generals command formations of division size, and the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst. They hold senior staff appointments in the Ministry of Defence, as well as other headquarters.
Okay, so we also have a Major General, and that insignia is just 2 stars.
Lieutenant General. Lieutenant Generals command formations of corps size, and other commands in the UK and overseas. They also hold very senior staff appointments in the Ministry of Defence, as well as other headquarters.
Okay, so our lieutenant generals just have 3 stars, as you could imagine.
General. Generals hold the most senior appointments, such as the Chief of Defence Staff, Vice Chief of Defence Staff, Chief of the General Staff, Deputy Supreme Allied Commander Europe, and the Commander-in-Chief of Land Forces.
And as you could imagine, our generals are just 4 stars.
Field Marshal. This is the highest rank in the British Army and has been since 1736. The rank of Field Marshal has become an honorary rank, with the last active officer to be promoted to the rank in 1994.
Okay, so the U.S. Army does not utilize the rank Field Marshal. Instead, we have what's called a 5-star general. And there's actually never been a Field Marshal in the U.S. Army, with one exception, that being Douglas MacArthur, but that is a very unique sense in that he was a Field Marshal in the Philippine Army, which at the time was a Commonwealth country of the United States. But that's a whole nother video in and of itself. The reason, funnily enough, that we didn't utilize the rank Field Marshal was during World War II, when we needed to create some sort of equivalent to it, that being our 5-star general. One of the officers who we were considering promoting to this new rank, his last name was actually Marshall, and we didn't want to have Marshal Marshall or Field Marshal Marshall as that person's title rank, and so we decided to opt instead for just 5-star general. And so there's a little bit of U.S. trivia for you. How's it going there? Hailstone from the future. Sorry about this weird cut. As I was going through editing this video, I realized that I had neglected to mention one of the most important ranks in the history of our country, a rank that only 3 people have ever been awarded. This rank is called the General of the Armies of the United States. This is, I suppose, in theory, what you might consider a 6-star general. It doesn't have any official insignia. There is a flag that was presented to one of the holders of this rank, and I'll get to that in a moment. But yeah, let me explain it a little bit. So the first person to receive this rank was George Washington. Now, as you can imagine, he's the father of our nation. the general who led us to victory against the British during our revolution, and he is considered the general of the armies of the United States. And even the other two men that are on this list, even though they in theory hold the same rank, George Washington is still considered and will always be considered the highest ranking member of the United States military. Number 2 is Ulysses S. Grant. Now, he is the general that led us to victory during our Civil War against the South, and he was just recently awarded the rank of General of the Armies of the United States. The third person to receive this rank was General John J. Pershing, even though by technicality he was the first person. General Pershing was America's Allied commander during the First World War. He was actually the general who really pushed for American independence in the First World War rather than being put under the command of French or British leadership. General Pershing was actually offered the opportunity to create his own new rank for this General of the Armies of the United States rank, which was a new thing, and he opted to stick with just the general rank. However, he was offered a flag to represent the General of the Armies of the United States, which I'll put up on the screen right now. So these are the three men who have held this rank throughout our nation's history. It is the actual absolute highest rank that we can hold, that we can give somebody. So there's a little bit of trivia. Now we'll get back to the regular video. Thank you.
Hopefully that will give you some insight as to the basic rank structure of the modern British Army.
Okay, well, I believe this is the end of the video, so let's talk about this briefly. Alrighty, well, I really enjoyed that video. It was, as you could imagine, very simple, but it was well enjoyed, and it's something that certainly educated me on British ranking structure. A lot of similarities, as you might obviously be able to imagine, considering that the American everything, our country, our military, has its roots predominantly in the British Isles, with a few exceptions with Prussia, but predominantly almost entirely from British origin. So a lot of similarities there, as you can imagine, and we've continued to hold those similarities all the way up until the present day. And I think that's one of the reasons why our two militaries work so well together, is because we're connected so deeply, both in roots and training and operations, everything like that. So I really enjoyed this video. If you guys would like to, don't forget to like and subscribe. It helps me out an absolute ton. Feel free to check out some of the other videos I have on my channel. I hope you guys have a great day, and we'll see you next time.